Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have another fantastic and a repeat guest. I have the honor of being here live via Zoom with Vietnam veteran John Podlaski. John is a accomplished author and also has cherrieswriter.com website, which is a fantastic, almost I would say the source of all things related to the Vietnam War. And you're going to learn all sorts of fun stuff today. So, John, welcome. And this is really fun for me. This is the first time we've had a previous guest back, and I'm so honored that you are he. So, thanks for
Thanks,
joining
Rob.
us.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's fun. We had such a great time last time we had you on, and folks, of course, there'll be a link online if you want to listen to the first interview with John more than a year ago now. And I'll tell you, you were the number one podcast view on our podcast site, the Spotify, and no surprise there. And you have had millions of people onto your website, and you've become like the source of all things for quite a few topics. So, how are you, and what's new in your neck of the woods there?
Well, as always, my website takes a lot of time.
Sure.
Not only am I reviewing different articles and cherry picking what I want to post, I respond to a lot of requests. I get a lot of questions. Uh, my website is coming up to its 6 millionth hit
Holy cow.
since I've been there.
Yeah.
And I've got a lot of people on the Facebook groups, the military groups that I belong to, are all touting this particular website. As you had mentioned earlier, it's kind of all things related to Vietnam War and its warriors. And people are not tired of reading it. There's feedback that I get from people is that, hey, continue the legacy. It seems that not very many people are doing it. You think of those who have served in the Vietnam War, the youngest is approaching 70 years old,
Yeah.
and the oldest, I know of Vietnam vets in their late 80s, early 90s. Some of them served in Korea and they also served in Vietnam. But to hear those accolades, from all the people that do contact me, that stay live with the show, and my weekly posts that I put out, I've got almost 700 posts that are on there. I got on Spotify for a while, and all of my posts were downloaded to Spotify, and they had a choice of downloading that and listening while they were reading, or just sit back and listen. But then 6 months ago, there was some kind of a change at Spotify, and they stopped working with WordPress, and that ended for me. So I'm
Okay.
not the type of person that could read the story, record it. I don't have that magical voice like you do.
Oh, jeez. I don't know if I have that either, but yeah, that's incredible, John. It's yeah, your site is fantastic. And folks, in case you forgot or you're not familiar, it's cherrieswriter.com. And what John's done is put together incredible collections, not only of his own experiences, but other Vietnam veteran stories. And John, you can add whatever I might be missing here, but you have an incredible slideshow. You have, of course, some of your past interviews and interviews of other veterans. You have articles, like you said, you have, would you say, over 700 now articles?
Different, yeah.
It's just incredible. The history there, it is been noted as like you really are like the number one. I'm going to just say, in my own opinion, and I've seen other people say the same thing. You're like the source of information from first hand accounts of that war. So if there's someone out there with a thirst of knowledge on that war, whether you're just interested in the history, I would say even teachers should go to your site because of how much you have put in there. You even have a wonderful little segment there of music from that era, which I found very interesting as well. So it's just fantastic. So you're pretty much on that. Is that like a daily at this point? Is that like a part of your daily routine or
Exactly.
yeah?
Yeah, I've got to dedicate at least an hour or two every day
Wow.
just to respond to requests. And as you mentioned, the expert, I don't see myself as an expert, but I do get questions, critical questions regarding that war. And it gets to the point where I start wondering myself what the answers are. I didn't have them. So I would look them up and get back to that person with a link or an answer or whatever have you. But I'm not the know-it-all, and a lot of people do think I am.
No, but you're incredibly organized and you know how to connect things and people together, which is an incredible resource that you have. It's a huge skill set. What do you think is like one of the top um I don't know, topics or categories that comes up a lot from people that maybe aren't familiar with the war or even the military? Is there kind of like a theme to some of these questions that kind of makes you sit back and go, huh? Because maybe this sort of civilian that is stumped on something that uh, folks like you and I would know instantly. Is there like a theme to some of those types of questions? Or maybe
One
one thing in particular
particular
that
page,
surprised you that people didn't know?
well, there's one particular page that is my highest visited page, and it's a translation of slang terms that the soldiers used in Vietnam
Okay.
and their definition and even a photo. You know, if I could find a photo that goes with it. And it's directed toward Army, Marines, and Navy had their own speak. Air Force had their own as well, you know, so I tried to get as many of them as I could. It's pretty much visited by those who had been there because a lot of the comments I get are, oh my God, I forgot all about that. You know, and oh, you brought that back up. What about this? What about that? So they would also contribute things that I had missed. Um, as far as uh, the feedback I get too is that, hey, because you're a former infantry soldier, a lot of your thoughts and articles and such are directed uh, as per infantry soldier. You know, in other words, things that I may have done that others then can associate to their own spouses or friends or relatives. Uh, and I don't get into the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines uh, type of things, but I periodically find decent articles that I throw in there. And I try to get all the branches of the service, but pretty much everything is dedicated toward the infantry on this particular website. And I'll try and keep it focused on different holidays that are coming up. I just I have a report article that I keep bringing up every Christmas, and it shows how soldiers celebrated Christmas in Vietnam.
Hmm.
And they were actual pictures that I either found on the internet or people had sent to me because they see it and, oh, I got some of those pictures. Well, send them to me and I'll include them in the article. So I'll change the date and I'll post that every year.
That's
And I get a
great.
lot of feedback from that particular article too, because soldiers in war, they still got a minute to celebrate Christmas. And it's a way of showing, well, the Bob Hope show and guys in their bunkers with a little Christmas 6-inch Christmas tree that was sent to them by their parents,
Right.
you know, in the mail, uh, decorating an old bush with beer cans, you know, those type of pictures. So that's what I try to do. I try to spread it around as much as I can, and I do include the good, bad, and the ugly. The My Lai massacre, for instance, you know, that was something that quite a few civilians got killed. It was a big thing that was sort of pushed under the rug by the government and by the military until somebody found out about it. and then went to the court system and so on. And then the population and civilians at home saw that, and oh, it just added to the stigma of what a Vietnam veteran is and what they're actually doing over in that country.
Sure. Yeah, I love how you don't hide from. I like how you are basically a historian at this point. That's what that's how I see that site. It's a constantly updating but never changing the history of that war. It's like a virtual museum of sorts. So I love the fact that you do that because if we don't look at all the history, then we're doomed, as they say, to repeat it. Um, do you find that there's a lot of fellow Vietnam veterans? Like, do you have kind of like a bunch of folks that you've seen time and time again comment that kind of come back to your site and try to add things to it or prompt you with new topics? Is there kind of like a regular following of folks that you've kind of gotten to know through the website over the years?
Maybe not through the website itself, but through the group pages, especially on Facebook
Okay.
and Twitter, where I'll see the same people respond. I've got 5,000 plus followers on
Oh,
Twitter and Facebook. So trying to keep track of, a dozen different names. There's a few of the same names that continue to pop up and make their comments no matter where I publish them. Uh, so yeah, in a way, but I don't get any suggestions for them. Hey, how about talking about this, or have you considered an article about that? I don't get that kind of feedback. It's pretty
hmm.
most, as you say, a historian, and I'm asked questions of people whose father may have served with this and this unit. Am I aware of the unit? Can I give them a little bit of history of that unit? Well, no, I can't. I can tell you about the unit I served with, but no, I'm not that big of a historian.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just incredible. It's a labor of love. I mean, it's just incredible how much stuff you have in there. So, I'm curious about the music part. How did that come about? Was that just your own recollection of songs, or did you research some of that, or how did that part
I
come?
did I did a lot of research, and I'd go back into the oh mid 60s and early 70s. Well, that's when I was coming of age, and a lot of those songs I remember. Uh, Went back to the billboards and saw the rankings and so on, and started researching whether or not these songs were available on YouTube or Spotify or any of those places. And I just included the songs of the era, so to speak, and I just collected every song that I knew. Uh, Matter of fact, I'm preparing an article that will be published within the next 3-4 weeks on the top 20 protest songs.
Oh, okay.
Where that group of people had their own music, and they're saying that the Vietnam War caused a whole change in music and the way it went. Uh, the protest song, they stick out. One of them maybe was, and I'm at a loss, but it's the Kent State uh, shooting
Oh, sure.
where the
In
four
Ohio. Yeah.
school kids
Yeah.
went, yeah, and the band played this Ohio song.
Hmm.
So I found that there's another guy, Oker, I believe is his name. He had like three protest songs in the top 20, and I never heard any of them,
Hmm.
but researching and finding that out, uh, it's interesting how when the songs play, I have some people that have commented, but I find it true for myself. A particular song may put me back into a scene that I recall way back when I was 18 years old, and I remember doing this when this song was airing.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, oh, geez, I remember that. And other people would say, oh yeah, I remember doing this, and this when that song was being played.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how that came about.
Yeah, music has that unique ability to just kind of have us do a time warp sometimes. And some of the protest songs, I'm trying to recall, I'm certainly not a source for this, but I'm trying to remember if it was Fogerty, a senator's song, Senator's Son. I'm probably going to mess this
Oh
up,
yeah, yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
but one of the artists in that band was in the service himself. And I thought that was an interesting connection there. And I don't want to misquote and have my facts be wrong, but that's also an interesting take is how many people served, perhaps drafted or volunteered, and then became singer-songwriters, and how much that influence might be in the mix of some of that music.
Well, I was
So,
surprised to find out Chris Christopherson was a
yes,
helicopter pilot
yes, yes.
in Vietnam, and for him to come back and have his career go on like it did, the the Doors head singer, his father was an admiral in the Navy,
Yeah.
and for some reason he never got drafted or he avoided the draft or whatever have you. But he sang a lot of the uh, protest type songs, that went on as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can think about a lot of that. Your Fogerty song about Senator's son not going and uh, but an interesting fact, and I find this too in regards to one of my articles that I published facts about the war. Uh, there was only about 35% of draftees who ended up in Vietnam. So actually 65% were volunteers. And the stigma around is that mostly draftees are the ones who were sent to Vietnam and who died in the war, and that's not true. Only 35%. Uh, that's an interesting fact that I posted in one of my articles. Uh, and I lost my train of thought. So continue on, Rob.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, another misconception is this. There's a lot of negative connotation with people who were drafted. And a lot of those stats and these comments they just don't hold up to reality. People don't realize how many uh, college educated and with diplomas folks that were in the Vietnam War. There was this idea a long time ago. There was a lot of dropouts and draft. None of that was true. So that's unfortunate that became, like you said, a stigma. Um, it was some of the highest educated ranks we saw, even compared to like World War II and that. And I want to go back, if you don't mind, just a fun, because you mentioned Chris Christopherson. I have to go back to a fun thing. Are you familiar with the story of how he um, got one of his demo tapes out there? Do you know the story between him and another famous artist? Oh, I get to tell you something. This is great. Okay, so he was in the reserves. He was in the component at a base where he had access to a helicopter. And as the story goes, his own words, he took advantage of liberties of his flight time, and he went to Johnny Cash's home, his home residence. He had a lot of acres apparently, and landed and basically tried to get some demo tapes to Johnny Cash. And what a bizarre stunt! But as again, you can vet this by both celebrities. Johnny Cash talks about how it was such a crazy stunt. Who would do something like this? Johnny Cash also served in the military, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that a lot of people are familiar with that. So because you had two veterans, both served and were both, passionate about songwriting and such and performing, there must have been something in Johnny Cash's head that said, "Well, this guy's so crazy, I might as well at least listen to the tape or something." And that's one of the things that gave Christopherson, his eventually his break, and they performed together. Um, so yeah, I'll send you a fun little clip about the two of them talking about that. But only
That's
veterans.
first I heard of that.
Yeah, it's a bizarre story. I'll have to send it to you. After this, I'll send you a fun story about that. But um, yeah, what do you think are some of the other um, is there something out there, I guess, that you really wish more, let's say like the younger generation, we're coming up through this time we just went through with a pandemic and all these other changes, and now unfortunately, we have more global military conflicts going on as you and I speak today. History is such an important thing that we have to learn the right lessons from. Is there something you really wish more people would focus on when they look at the Vietnam War? Do you think that, if there was like a young teacher, for example, that wanted to approach this topic, what's some of the highlights that you really wish people would get serious and actually communicate with future generations that we can take some good lessons that makes things better? What are some of those ideas that you wish more people would focus on when they talk about the Vietnam War?
Well, unfortunately, uh, the high schools today, they spend very little time talking about the Vietnam War. It's a couple days. Fortunately, the Vietnam Veterans of America chapter I belong to, we have a group that visited or visits high schools, senior groups in their history class, and they talk about the Vietnam War. Uh, I used to be part of that group as well, and we would have a carousel of slides that were volunteered by other members of the chapter, which lasted about 15 or 20 minutes. And the backing of it, we had a cassette tape that we would play that would include Billy Joel's Goodnight Saigon.
Mm.
Uh, and we played that song as we were showing these slides. And the kids could not fathom what these soldiers had to go through, sloshing through swamps, sleeping through the rain, not bathing for a month, wearing the same clothes for 2, 3 weeks. And you'd see a lot of commotion within the kids. No, not me. No way. And they would not believe that. Uh, on the flip side of the coin, the veterans, while they were in country, did a lot for the orphanages. In fact, there's still 3 guys that I know of that visit Vietnam regularly on a yearly basis, and they stop at their own orphanage. Not that they used to be in that orphanage, they took care of that orphanage because they were stationed nearby. So they continued on taking up collections during the year and such, and then going there personally once a year and presenting a check to the nuns, who would run the orphanage. But they built villages for the villagers, for the population. They dug wells. They built an infrastructure through that country for roads and highways and everything that is there today. And a lot of the veterans uh, who visit Vietnam today come back with the opinion that for some reason those people love Americans and nobody holds a grudge. But then again, they learn very little about the war during their high school time as well. So, yeah, there was a stigma, but there was a lot of good that came out of this war. And if not, the people who tried to escape that country when the war finally ended and died out on the oceans trying to get away in these flimsy boats, or the people that have come together now, Vietnamese who have two, three, maybe three generations in California and down in Louisiana, I think are the two biggest settlements of Vietnamese. And they would not have come if the Americans were that evil, in the way that they were projected. Uh, but no, those people are thankful. There are some veterans groups that we run across on Veterans Day that were former Vietnamese soldiers, not the VC type, but the ones that fought side by side with the Americans. Uh, there's not enough good things they could say about us, and a lot of those good things are not presented. They're not out there for kids or people to learn. And I throw those on my website periodically, different articles that happen and what became of them. But the orphanages, the biggest thing that they did too at the end of the war, they had an operation called Baby Lift, and they snuck out, I don't know, 2,500 or so babies within a 3-day period and got them out of that country before it was overrun. So yeah, those are the things or the sides of the war that are never talked about. Uh, should be, and let everybody see the good things that had happened too over there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does the topic of a draft itself, is that something that comes up periodically or that's been discussed in depth on the site? Is it just the nature of what that was and there's people that talk about whether or not we might have one in the future. Is that something that's kind of come up on your site?
A lot of people say that the draft should be reinstated and it should be mandatory military service for at least government officials, but for everybody else, like they do in Israel. You see pictures of women walking around in Israel with M16s on they're carrying them on their back with a sling, because it's mandatory for them once they turn 18 is to spend 2 years in the military. I think that if everybody uh, had that, this would be a whole different country as well.
Yeah, I often think about, you know, because I've been fortunate, I volunteered, I joined in the 90s, but I grew up at a time where most of the parents or aunts, uncles, and friends' parents and such were from the Vietnam era. My father served during that time, a lot of people in the neighborhood. So I often think about, what that would be for some generations because you look around nowadays and you kind of wonder, you compare some people that you see in the community, and then you remember your days in the service and you wonder how they would, fit.
I do that all the time, Rob. I've gone to high school graduations or gone to restaurants and you see these 17, 18-year-old kids, and I look at them and think, oh my God, that was me back then. How in the world did I survive? Because you think, oh my God, these people couldn't make it a day,
Yeah,
but oh,
yeah. I like the idea of, I don't know if, I mean, I agree with you. If people had to serve, obviously that would change the culture, over time. It wouldn't happen immediately. It'd be met with resistance, of course, but over time it would change the culture. And I could argue for the better, but I also like the idea. Some people advocate the idea of just civil service in general for a certain amount of time, especially if you're not engaged with if you're 19 years old and you're not in college and you're flipping burgers, okay, that's fine. But there's people that advocate the idea like that's the demographic where maybe they should have to spend some time doing, military or civil service. And that's an interesting idea. I mean that the thought of how that would play out is intriguing to me. And to your point, we're dealing with other countries that do mandate, years of service. And you see what we're up against. Our military is at one of its lowest points, certainly in the time you and I have been around. World War II, 1 out of 4 households was serving. During your time, Vietnam era, it was 1 out of 10. During my time, it's 1 out of 100, and now we're at less than half of that. That's where we've gone in the last, 8 decades. So there's definitely a recruiting issue, no doubt about it. I don't know if the draft's the answer, but I was just curious on your take from that because of course your time, that's the most recent time. And I wonder with the comments and the people that talk about that if we haven't gone full circle, where it went from being controversial to maybe like now more of a rational idea. Maybe we should talk about that again.
Yeah. I've already got an article in the queue as well about uh, that very issue
Hmm,
that you're talking about.
hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, recruiting's low. I don't know. It's a very odd time. So
well,
and
they did a nice job advertising it way back when,
yeah,
but when people see what actually happens, because Iraq, Afghanistan, all of that's been happening over the last 20 years or since your time in the service, uh, and the traumatic brain injuries that are occurring because they've got so much protection on them.
yeah,
It doesn't protect you from a blast,
yeah,
and people are starting to see that. In fact, at the VA hospital, when I go, I'm seeing a lot of 30-year-olds that are wandering through the hallways with different issues compared to, the older guys that I have. And I think that uh, the wages aren't comparable to what people would get flipping hamburgers. And why should they want to commit 4 or 6 years of their life to something like that? Where if you have a family, you're going to be away from your family for all of this time, either for training or uh, responding somewhere. Uh, yeah, I think getting people today to just volunteer is a very tough issue, and a lot of these recruiters just don't know what to do.
yeah.
But they're not filling the ranks that they're supposed to, which worries me.
Yeah, it worries me greatly. I mean, just the percentages of, it's we are so understaffed to defend our country, and now we have the exposure of being involved in multiple countries of potential engagements. So I just don't know. I'm not sure what the answer is there, but um,
Well, going
I'm
back
glad
to
I'm not a recruiter. I'm glad I don't have that pressure.
uh, going back to what you said about letting people know and so on. A couple years ago, the president made March 29th National Vietnam Veterans Day. It's a day that Vietnam veterans should be proud, uh, but the word isn't out there yet. And I've put out a couple articles already just prior to that date, announcing, hey, if you don't know, this should be a national holiday, no garbage pickup, banks will be closed.
Right.
It's not to that stage yet, but the recognition isn't there either, and I'm doing my part trying to get the word out. Uh, but that's something that's lacking as well. We've got to do a better job at getting that out so that people do understand, realize, and let them celebrate with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, you mentioned your chapter of the VVA, the Vietnam Veterans of America, and we have a fantastic one here locally. Just absolutely wonderful. Chapter 77 in Tonawanda. So I would is what you're doing with them going into the schools and such, is that pretty much a regular program that you think a lot of those chapters are doing? Or is that kind of unique to your location?
I know of some that are doing them, but no, it's something that we initiated, I want to say in the late 80s
Okay.
is when I started visiting the schools. And it's a point now where we had to go and back then and visit the schools and try to get them to allow us to come in. And a lot of them really didn't want to take that chance. But now they're contacting us. And it's to the point where we've got to look at our calendar, to make sure that we have an opening to be able to come out, because it seems that that particular time in the semester is always in the spring after they come back from spring break. And if you get 100 different schools contacting you for that 1 week, it makes it kind of hard
Sure.
to get them all in on the calendar. So, but I do know that there are some of the other chapters that do it as well, but there's not a fundamental script that we all follow. It's do your own thing. Just make sure the legacy continues.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
VVA, we're to the point right now where uh, they were established based on Vietnam Veterans of America. And if you're not a Vietnam veteran, you can't get into it. And we took the Gulf War soldiers under our wing, and they have their own chapters as well, but we're the ones that are helping them get over the hump and get established and get recognized and so forth. But there was a lot of different debating going on in our national convention about what do we do with, most of these Vietnam veterans are approaching 80 years old. And it's getting to the point where the membership is starting to dwindle. Are we going to turn it over to the Gulf War vets? And the money that we have collected that we give to charities and food banks and so on, what are we going to do with that? And the newest approach after 2 years of debating is we're up until the last man standing. So, the money will be donated to charities and so on and so forth. But it's I don't know how much longer the chapter is going to be functioning,
Yeah.
or any of these chapters throughout the United States, because when the last veteran's done, that organization is done.
Yeah. And I've seen this play out with, in a similar scale, the legions used to have certain criteria. They've expanded that criteria. The VFW, I'm a member of both, by the way. I'm not picking on
Oh
either of
my,
them, but they've had to change rules over time. The post I'm part of is still what they call a closed post. You have to have served overseas. There are some that are open, whereas as long as you served, period. But a lot of the legions now, you don't even have to have served. And of course, there's auxiliaries. The auxiliary was always I don't want to say the workaround, but it was the way of, letting people who want to participate and want to help, might be a spouse or a child or just someone who's patriotic and wants to pitch in and be part of that, but not give them the title of an actual member because they didn't serve.
or an
So
associate member.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I've seen that play out. And of course the pandemic pushed unfortunately, a lot of these groups, financially couldn't keep up. If they weren't open, there was a lot of them that their operating budget was always contingent on being open to the public for, whatever, a spaghetti dinner, a fish fry, something like that. So unfortunately, we watched a lot of those close during those years also.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is there, but I like the commitment of, supporting every Vietnam vet, right up to the last one. So hopefully before that stage, we'll have something in place to keep the legacy going. Um,
So I see more and more vets with their Vietnam veterans hat on.
I do too. Yeah.
Uh,
Isn't that something?
Korean war hats, and these are people that are with walkers, heading down the street, and they got their Korean
Yeah.
war hat on.
I love that though,
Uh,
because a lot of them didn't wear that for years, right? Either from intimidation or just frustration. There was a chapter in this country's history where Vietnam veterans weren't embraced the way that they should have been. So I do love seeing that now. I see it all the time. I see it at the mall. I see it everywhere I go.
well, the
Coffee
pandemic,
shops. Mhm.
there was some good in the pandemic on my side because it gave me some time to write two more books, over and above cherries.
Yep.
And I was then able to take something that was mentioned in cherries and expand on it and write a whole book. Uh, then it came time to, well, I left this sort of open ended, so I better write another book, and try and do that. So, uh, 21 was the last year that I had my other book published, and I've had three short stories that are not in paperback, but they're electronic versions published as well. So I've had some time to do some writing, and it helped me at least get the word out and do this. So you had mentioned earlier, I spend time daily on my website, but I also have to do my own marketing. So I've got 6 books published. How do I get the word out?
Right.
And I don't know if you're aware, but Cherries and the first book that I wrote after Cherries, uh, they both became #1 Amazon bestsellers in their categories.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
And Cherries is 13 years old, and it's still doing well, still selling every month. And people, it's kind of interesting to see how people are purchasing printed copies versus electronic copies. And it used to be when ebooks first came out, probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, uh, they cost way less, than a printed book was. You can get an ebook for 99 cents, but if you want to get a printed book, it cost you $9, for the same story. Um, but yet people are buying these printed books more than they're buying the electronic books today. And I don't know if it's because you want something physically in your hand that you can turn the page, and look, versus just holding a Kindle in your hand and reading and reading and reading. But
Well,
yeah,
it's just,
so
yeah, something
marketing
tangible. Yeah.
marketing is a big thing too.
Yeah.
That's takes time.
Yeah. And for our listeners' sake, John, because you and I talk and people that heard last time you were on the show. But if you don't mind, go ahead and list the books, and we'll make sure that they have the links underneath this interview so people can go and pick up a copy. But would you just kind of briefly go through the list so that people know the titles and where to find them?
Well, I only have two of them here, but uh, Cherries, a Vietnam War novel, was the first one that I wrote. And what it tells is the story of a 19 or 18-year-old naive kid who goes to Vietnam and grows over the year that he's there to become a leader and take over being responsible for a group of people. Uh, and it goes through all the different emotions that occur while he's there, and you follow this throughout the year. Uh, the next book that came out was When Can I Stop Running? It's backwards. I don't know if it's going to show you backwards
No,
too.
I got it. Yeah, it shows it right. We got
But
it.
uh, this was taken from the Cherries book too. It's an incident that occurred where myself and my partner, we had to go outside of the fire base about 200 meters in pitch darkness and just sit there as an early warning system. So if the enemy soldiers were prowling around and thinking about hitting a wire or what, we could report. But the military lost a lot of soldiers in this particular uh, detail, I'll call it, because uh, if you're caught out there, you're done for. But what I do during the course of the night for 12 hours, I go back and forth every hour if there's something that I remember when I was a kid that reflects on what's happening right now. I would tell that story. For instance, 8 years old, I get sent down into the basement by my mother after dark to fetch something that's way in the back of the room. And you got this uh, big coal furnace that looks like an upside down octopus hanging from the ceiling. And there's a monster that for sure is hiding behind there.
Right.
So how do you approach getting this article that your mother wants you to get? Another time, an incident occurred that made me reflect back when I was in camp, 8 years old, first time. And because you were 8 years old, the counselors used to screw with you at night. You'd have your campfire and you talk about ghost stories and so on. But the bathrooms were outhouses that were like 100 yards away from your cabin. And you got 28-year-olds that are huddled on bunk beds, and you hear this howling, which is supposed to be the werewolf and so
Right.
on. Well, you hide under the covers, and so it goes back and forth, and there's different incidences that occur during that hour while on that watch, and then again an incident walking through the graveyard or something, like that. Uh, there is one of our other groups that were another 100 yards up the trail. They ambushed a group of enemy soldiers, killed 9 of them, but then they had to move in the middle of the night, so they came back toward us. Uh, so it was a devastating night. So we go back to the camp, and Death in a Triangle reflects on when can I stop running by being the next morning, because the captain approached us and says, we want you to go back out where you were and check on the bodies and see what else you can find and so on. And we ended up, was supposed to be a 2-hour trip there and back, lasted 3 days.
Mm.
And we had no supplies with us. We were surrounded by enemy soldiers, and how did we get out of this, and so on. So that is Death in a Triangle. My other books are Unwelcomed. I got home from Vietnam, and a week before I got home, somebody had tried to break into the house. My father had a ball peen hammer in his hand, and he happened to take it out on the hand that was sticking through the broken window. Uh, 2 days after I got home, my sister had told me about it. We went out and bought a shotgun at Montgomery Ward's, and I was pissed because they wouldn't let me buy a pistol.
Mm.
You're only 19 years old. You can't buy a pistol. You got to be 21 years old. So I bought the shotgun. Well, sure enough, 2 days after I get home, these 2 guys return. They wanted to get back into the house again, and me, who just gets home from being shot at, I go out in just a pair of undershorts and I take on these 2 guys with a shotgun. And then different things occur. Police came and so on. So that is a short story. Another short story is um, I'm at a loss. What is my other short story? Um,
Well, the one you won an award for early on, your first short story with um, the date escapes me. I apologize, but that was early on how you kind of started with your writing contest, right? Wasn't it your first?
yeah, yeah. That was the first time that I submitted that for a contest,
Mm.
and it was a first person type of a book, and a an editor approached me and said, "Look, if you rewrite it in the third person, we might consider publishing it."
Right, right.
So at that time, uh, we had typewriters, and I had piles of rewrites because, as you know, as a person who writes a book, an author, he'll reread and rewrite a chapter 100 times.
Yep.
And today it's very easy to move words around and do what you have to. With a typewriter, you got to retype the whole chapter just to add a word, to your sentence. So it was very difficult at that time, but uh, it wasn't too long after that Atari came out, one of their game consoles with a word processor. And with the big 5 1/4 floppy disks, you can go ahead and type, and then it was your early day computer. You could save 5 pages on a floppy disk. Well, Cherry's is over 400 pages long,
Right.
so that was a lot of floppy disks. And I learned that if you had a hole puncher, you punch on the other side of the disk, you can flip it over and use both sides. So educational. Well, once Cherry's was published, and by this time, 20 years had elapsed because it was put up in the garage and given up on and so forth. Uh, During my high school reunion, it was a 40th reunion. I had, I'm sorry, it was 30th reunion. I had 3 or 4 copies of the original uh, first person draft, which was only like 180 pages or so. And I passed it around to all the students, and they, uh, coming from a Catholic school, we had 60 kids in my graduating class. And when I saw them 10 years later at the reunion, it was, "Hey, what became of that book that you wrote?" And I said, "Well, I gave it up in this and this." And then, "You're crazy. That thing was great. You need to go ahead and." So anyway, everybody pitched in and they wanted to help, and we made the thing happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad that you stuck it out because we talked about that before, that how many years went by where it almost didn't come to light. And think about your life now. And if you had not done that, my gosh, all this what you've done. First of all, to write a book back then, like you said, stacks of paper. It's like you were taking on that'd be like using a musket in today's warfare. You were doing
True.
it the most difficult way,
Very true.
but you did it, and we're all so grateful. I mean, all the lives that your stories have touched, the website, like you said, you're almost 6 million, John, almost 6 million people. I mean, think about that. It's impactful on so many levels, and that that's that's quite the story to tell, and to have that much of an audience shows you how much thirst there is for that type of history, the rich history, the individual stories, how it impacted, whether it's one soldier or one platoon. It's just incredible. It's incredible. The 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 trajectory that your life took, all because you finally got committed to writing that down, and you had people that pushed you to get that out in print. So just incredible.
And that book came about, I'd say we'd been married 2 years. So this is 3 years out of Vietnam. And my mother had saved every letter that I had written home. So we were there visiting on a Sunday afternoon, and she brought out this shoebox filled with, 70, 80 letters that I had written home. And my wife, being curious, she started digging through them, and start reading them. And what do you mean about this? What do you mean about that? How come you wrote this? And I would try and answer. She says, why don't you just take these letters and answer the questions that I have, and maybe you can write a book. So that's actually what kicked it off, you know.
Great.
And I was halfway through it, 3/4 of the way through it, when this contest came up, and I submitted to I've even got the still hanging up on my wall over here. It's from the University of Wisconsin, Washington, and it got uh, congratulations. The book was initially called The Ingenuous Soldier, and which means naive and so on. And the editor who asked me to rewrite it back then, he says, change the name to Cherries. He says, because that's what you were called, and focus on that as you write this book, and how a cherry felt, while growing up. But it received honorable mention, through a stateside contest. So yeah, I was very happy with that.
Yeah. Oh, John, it's just so incredible. It really is. So I'm so grateful for you sharing these stories and your time today. It's always great to catch up with you. I'm a big fan, obviously, and a lot of our listeners have commented, over the past year. I'll tell you one of the things we get a lot of comments about, if you don't mind touching this subject, is just more about your family, if you don't mind. Um, one of the comments online was one of the greatest love stories ever. When you shared with us a little bit about your parents and how that came to be. A lot of our listeners thought that was really just a unique story, and I think I even told you that that should be the next book if you want to do that type of book. But would you share with our listeners today a little bit about your parents, because I know that was a big comment that we got from last year.
Well, I can add to that.
Oh,
but
fantastic! Yeah,
but the story goes as such. My dad was in Poland. He was in the university, he had a master's degree, was working on his doctorate degree in political science. And this was 1938 and a half, somewhere in that time frame, where Germany was threatening Poland, and during the Second World War. Well, they shut all the schools down. They put everybody in the military in Poland. And my dad, since he had that background, they made him a captain in the cavalry. So, they got their horses, they got their 3 foot long sabers, and so on. Well, when Germany invaded Poland, they had all these horseback soldiers with sabers taking on tanks. And it took 3 weeks before that country was overrun. And everybody that survived was made a POW. My dad he spent until 1945 in a POW camp in Poland, and then moved down to Germany. My mother had a farm, or her farm was adjacent to one of the POW camps. And she would come over to the wire and sneak food and apples and different kind of things through the wire to him. A few times she was pushed out of there and, told not to do that and so forth. But eventually, after the war, they got together and I got married, and then I came about. Interesting point, though. My father died in '96, so I wasn't thinking about being a writer, but you're absolutely truthful, I should have learned more about his experience in the POW camp if I was smart enough then. But what's interesting here is that my mother developed dementia and we had to put her into a home. And I got a call from the nurses one night. Your mother is experiencing night terrors. And it's unexplainable, but she would start screaming and so on and so forth. And she would make comments that a couple ambulance attendants had gone into the room across the hall from hers, and she was screaming, "They'll never come back. They'll never come back. They'll hang them. They'll shoot them. They'll do something." Well, come to find out, my sister was 4 years old during the war, and when my mother had the farm and so on, she was harboring Jews. And this came out through all of these different dreams or whatever night terrors that she was having. She was reenacting her time during the Second World War when they were almost discovered or bombs were falling from, the Americans. But she was sneaking, she was harboring Jews there on her farm and then sneaking them into France, Italy, or different areas. And I tried, sat with her and said, "Well, tell me about this." "Oh, Johnny, I don't remember. I don't remember." And I was, "Oh my God, that would be one hell of a story, to go." My older sister, she don't remember that happening. She was only 3, 4 years old at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, just an incredible story. So just quite the generational legacy of incredible people here, John, I'll tell you.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your extra time and catching up. This is it's always a pleasure. And folks, I want to remind you, you can follow John's writings every week. You can find something new. But I assure you, even if you start for the first time today, you'll have years worth of things to learn from him and other Vietnam veterans. Been talking here with John Podlaski, a wolfhound, one of my other favorite topics. And you can follow his writings and see all of his published books at cherrieswriter.com. And you can also find his bio and the video of today's broadcast on our site. Feel free to share that with your network, get it out there, let people learn more about his service and all Vietnam veterans that we as a nation owe a great debt of gratitude to. And please celebrate Vietnam Veterans Day, which is March 29th. And I hope when you hear this broadcast, it prompts you to maybe share this and share the information about that holiday with your network so that all of these stories are heard loud and clear. John, I just want to thank you again for your time. And I hope we can do this. This is a first for me
We
to
can
have
do it
a
yearly.
yeah, this is the first sequel interview I've done ever. So I'm so honored that you were able to do this. And maybe we'll do a third follow up down the road. So, but thanks so much for your time. God bless you and your family. And as I try to say to all Vietnam veterans, welcome home and thank you for everything as a direct beneficiary to what your cohort has done. I was able to go to college on the post 9/11 bill, which was crafted by Vietnam veterans. A lot of your fellow veterans there paved the way to make sure that future generations wouldn't get passed over in the manner that you did when you first got home. So I sincerely thank you as I try to do to all Vietnam veterans, because you guys really, you took the beating and you turned around and made sure it stopped going forward. And I'm forever grateful for that. So thank you for your service and welcome home.
Thanks, Rob. Pleasure being here.
Thank you.
You take
Folks,
care.
yep, folks, in John's honor, I want to play this special song and then I'll be back at the other side. Stand by.